Welcome to this week's episode of On Record PR. I am here today with our EVP, Sarah Larson, and our resident certified SHRM professional, Elizabeth Ogilvie. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
So we are recording today's episode to release on Monday, June 2nd. And we are talking today about an ongoing topic that we have covered in past episodes, which is the shifting legal and political landscape. In particular, ERGs and similar programs have been coming under increased scrutiny with the executive orders that have come out against law firms specifically, and then some EOs more generally. So in today's episode, we are going to explore what law firms should be thinking about as they consider whether or not to adapt their ERGs and DE&I initiatives in the environment that we're in. We'll talk about the risks and opportunities that the legal industry is facing under these orders, and also Elizabeth and Sarah will cover practical strategies for staying compliant. All under the umbrella that we want to promote continuing to foster a culture of belonging and inclusivity in law firms and really in any organization. So, Elizabeth, let's start with you. What are ERGs and why are they important?
So ERGs are employee resource groups. They are also known as SIGs, special interest groups. A lot of firms call them affinity groups, but these are employee-led groups and initiatives of like-minded people who share interests, similar skill sets, who come together and support one another and pursue that interest, whatever that interest might be.
And Sarah, why did ERGs form and how have they changed over the years?
Sure, absolutely. So we've seen so much growth and change in this area and really expansion of kind of the mission mandate. When they first started forming, many, many years ago, they really did form around demographics. Women in the law came together. How do I balance being a working mom or a female professional in this world that has traditionally been male dominated? How can I support people of color? How can I support people from the LGBTQ community? So they really did kind of form that first wave around demographics. But in increasing years, especially in the larger firm, we've seen a pretty big shift, I think Elizabeth will agree, away from just how we identify what we look like versus what our life experience is. So one of our clients has an affinity group for veterans. Another one has an affinity group for caregivers, people who are caregiving, whether that's parents caring for children, or if you're like me, in that kind of sandwich generation where you've got aging parents and children. So we've really seen an expansion of these groups. And over that time, their mission hasn't really changed, but this is a really good time, to Elizabeth's point, to kind of revisit why they exist.
So that's really helpful background from both of you because I have learned a lot of acronyms from our team members, ERGs being a newer one to me because, Elizabeth, you had mentioned firms that I worked in before coming to the agency called them special interest groups or had other names for them. So that foundation and kind of their purpose is really helpful in this conversation going forward. So how does this impact the way leaders talk about ESG?
Absolutely. So from a communication standpoint, again, to one of Elizabeth's point that I think she made in the last podcast, leadership has to really clearly communicate why all of these programs exist, what their purpose is within the business structure. What is the impact? What is their role in fostering professional development? What is their role in ensuring that every single person at the firm has equal opportunity, not just to opportunities and advances on paper, but in developing those relationships with the senior leaders at the firm who are really going to be able to share sometimes even the more conventional wisdom that is really important to success, but never really kind of gets written down, the unspoken rules. Energizing your talent pool, getting people excited. But really the most important thing to emphasize when they're talking about these groups, and this is where we're getting lots of questions from clients, like, can I even have these groups? Yes, you absolutely can. But you have to make sure that every single one of them is open to everyone, regardless of whether they fit that demographic. And I used the example of I'm not a veteran, and I've never had a veteran within my immediate family. In my extended family, yeah, but not my immediate family. I'd love to be able to join a veterans group just to listen to their experiences and their stories and how that shapes what they bring to work, so I understand how better to relate to them. So the message coming from kind of on high, from firm leadership, has to be that yes, this is what they were organized around, but every single group is open to everyone.
And increasingly, a lot of these groups are about knowledge sharing. So we are talking about more senior and more junior attorneys getting together and sharing best practices. So it isn't just about identity anymore. It's about professional development as well.
I think we have really honest conversations on our team pretty regularly about how diverse groups, and I think we're particularly proud of the diversity of perspective and background of our team, but how diverse groups really make decision making and brainstorming that much better for really any group, but for corporations. And Sarah, I really appreciate the example about the veterans group. One of our previous guests on the show, David Hubbard, who works at Verizon, talked a lot about how understanding the life experience and background of people who are different than you really help workplaces thrive, because you're able to then understand why people react a certain way or how they come to meetings with a certain perspective. So, Elizabeth, let's go back to you. How does all of this translate into the policies that a law firm should have in place about these employee-driven groups?
So on our last podcast, we were talking about BEAM. And so I'm going to bring that back now. As a starting point, I think it's important at this juncture, based on current events and what is happening, that everybody review your employee resource groups, your affinity groups, through the lens of BEAM. So the first thing I would recommend everybody doing before you start drafting policies is to analyze all your programs, run it through the BEAM framework, and then see what adjustments need to be made. That's the first step. The second step, you need to look at how your groups are organized. What are the leadership roles? Is there a criteria process, a vetting process for those leadership positions, right? How are these groups funded? And is it equitable? Is it fair? So those are the initial considerations that I think that law firms need to consider first before they start thinking about drafting policies, which is critical as well.
It sounds like in a lot of the work that we do, plans and writing things down in a way that is easy to educate your employees and easy to come back to as a reference point is really the key in making all of this work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
Sarah,
absolutely. If I could just add to that real
please.
quick. Nobody likes to take the time that they don't think is necessary to draft a policy. I'm not a big policy fan. I am a big fan of everyone understanding the mission and the why. So getting your leadership group together, who's in charge of these employee interest groups or overseeing these interest groups, getting them together and talking about, okay, why are we doing this? What is the point? What is the mission? And then explicit statements written down. We are forming. Elizabeth, can we say we are forming, or does it have to be like the employees are forming, since it's supposed to be employee driven?
Well, I think it depends how you
Is that
choose
just semantics?
I think it depends how you choose to go about it. My recommendation, that is the number one policy recommendation, is that just like a social media policy, you need an ERG, affinity group policy, that is in your employee handbook. And that is rules of the road that all your ERGs or affinity groups follow. That's first. And in those rules, it says they are open to all and not exclusionary. Very, very critical. I also like to see some of these rules dictate that these affinity groups have to be tied to some KPIs. And I hate to throw data at this, but I'm going to, because we want to prove these groups have value. And how we do that is to show, does this improve employee satisfaction? Does this improve employee retention? Does it attract employees, new hires? are you getting more revenue generation because you're training your younger lawyers to go out and rainmake? And they learn that in one of these affinity groups. So I think that having these KPIs spelled out shows that these affinity groups have a business purpose and that they're not performative. They're important employee benefits.
One of the things that Gina always likes to emphasize over the past couple of years is this huge shift that we are seeing in leadership as kind of the boomers start to retire and poor Gen X were usually ignored. Everybody goes right to talking about millennials, but hey, we're here and we have the best music, so come join us. So as the leadership roles evolve and more of the older, more senior, more seasoned, experienced attorneys start to think about retiring, the amount of knowledge that they are taking with them, if they don't take some time to download and to share it, I mean, that's going to be a huge loss of human capital. And these affinity groups are one way to help transfer that. I'm not sure how you can set a KPI to that. Like, I'm sure if we thought about it, we could come back with some recommendations, but that's a really important one. Yes. I'm sure
with most HR stuff, we can measure it if we pinpoint what we're looking for, what the objectives are, which is kind of why in the policies I want to make sure that each one of these groups does have objectives. It's not just having coffee for the sake of having coffee. It's having coffee to talk about strategies for client development.
And I like your points earlier, Elizabeth, about the purpose behind these policies, because like with other plans we help put in place, they do give your organization guardrails so that if
Yes.
in the event someone comes up with ideas that don't really align with the business goals or supporting your employees in the way that is true to your organization, it also gives leadership the ability to have criteria and say, this doesn't work, but why don't we work together to come up with something that does?
And I love the fact that you brought up criteria, because I think that if you hear people who are anti-affinity group out there, they're like, oh, well, the leadership positions are pre-chosen and it's not fair. And though we need to get that out of the conversation. I think there should be prerequisites for leadership positions within some of these affinity groups because they're leading the group. So does it mean that this person has prior volunteer experience that is relevant? Do they have practice area experience that is relevant? And look at those factors and make sure that is also spelled out so that it is showing a unique business purpose. This person is uniquely qualified to lead this group, and this is why.
So we're going to pause here for a message from our sponsor, and then when we get back, we'll tie everything back to the conversation around ERGs and practical tips for facilitating these conversations internally.
This episode is brought to you by Furia Rubel Communications, a public relations and marketing agency serving law firms and businesses worldwide. With an expert team positioned throughout the U.S. and supported by an international faculty, Furia Rubel enhances our clients' brands through integrated communications by providing expert guidance in crisis management and high-profile litigation, protecting brand and reputation, and supporting internal marketing teams. To learn more, visit furiarubel.com.
So we're back from our sponsor break, and Sarah, I want to direct the next question to you, which is, what should law firms be doing now to help prepare for questions around their ERGs and similar groups?
Yeah, we touched on it earlier, but just to make it kind of more an explicit recommendation, all of this stuff has to be written down, and it has to be authentic, and it has to be real. It can't be performative. If these are a part of your workplace culture, the policies and procedures, the guardrails, as you said, I think that's a good description for it. They need to be outlined in the employee handbook. They need to be,
Yes.
The first meeting of the year, the reannual organization, the whole group has to go over them, understand how they fit in, have very clear anti-discrimination policies written into them,
Yes.
stating explicitly everyone is welcome to join this group. And then, of course, you would hope that everyone would back that up with actions when other people try to join the group. But then that way everything is written down. So if a firm does get questions about it, whether today it's from, I don't know, the attorney general or a state attorney general or a reporter, if anybody does come and ask about the purpose of these affinity groups and, are they really serving a business purpose, everything is written down and documented.
And it's like I mentioned in the previous podcast, we've got some Supreme Court decisions that are already have addressed this. And one of those issues is a thing of value. A business development affinity group is a real thing of value. It could make the difference between moving up and stagnating in your job. So we need to be very careful if we are going to have criteria, that those criteria are they're not exclusionary, but they're based on things that have a business purpose that are related to the business purpose of the affinity group.
So these internal conversations to prepare your internal teams and communicate more broadly, but then also be prepared for these external questions are a really important step in this process. Who at the firm should be part of these conversations?
All the important decision makers, which isn't everybody, but it really should be a cross-disciplinary team. So we're talking, in-house counsel, if your firm's large enough to have one, in-house employment attorney, if you have one, whether it's in-house or whether you are their client as a firm, the head of HR and the head of communications. Yes. Please do not leave out communications. It is very important. I always follow the 80-20 rule. 80% of what you're doing is important, but how you roll it out, the other 20% can blow it all up if it's not done right. So always
100%. 100%, Sarah, 100%. Also, I think that we think about a leadership team, not every law firm includes their HR director in that. But in this particular circumstance, affinity groups touch all areas, and they could be in places you don't even know about, but you still need to know about them. And your HR director, your CHRO is going to know that. So they're a critical component of this as well.
Yes.
And it sounds like those are really the core folks, and that it may be that in different firms, there are different types of roles and different people, leaders who may need to be part of that conversation.
I would say if there is a leader that is connected to the business purpose of the affinity group, that leader needs to be involved. I think that's an easy way to answer that.
Yeah. And it makes total sense to have the head of, whether it's, whatever it's called at your firm, diversity and inclusion. Look, at the end of the day, diversity is just about recognizing that we are all different. And inclusion is just about recognizing that everyone brings something valuable to this workplace. And I think the more that we stop worrying about that and looking at those two facts and understanding these are good things. These are good things, and we want these things to continue. In fact, we're seeing some firms change. Kind of the DE&I chief title has been around for a long time, but we're seeing some firms really understand that this is more about culture. So chief cultural officer, chief workplace culture officer, what are some other ones we've heard recently, Elizabeth? Chief officer of inclusion, just including everyone. So having all of those people as part of that conversation makes a lot of sense. But the other one that nobody's really talked about yet, whoever's doing your recruiting, because if these affinity groups are a thing of value, your recruiters want to shout that out loud. Hey, law school grads, you want to come to this place because you're going to have access to, the top folks in your practice area. You're going to have access to great mentors. You're going to have access to a structured program of knowledge sharing. That's a real benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So I appreciate everyday learning from both of you. I know that you bring tremendous value to the clients with your insights, and I'm constantly reading in our messaging channels the insights you're sharing from programs you're attending and lessons learned from working with our clients. So thank you for sharing your insights with the audience today. We will continue to have these conversations because they are changing very quickly. And things are changing in the world very quickly, right? I think at one point we were waking up and like, what executive order has happened today? That feels, knock on wood, like it's slowed down a bit. but we still need to stay on top of these things. So thank you. And thank you to our listeners. We continue to appreciate your feedback so greatly. Please continue to send those messages to us at podcast@onrecordpr.com. Tell us your feedback on the show. Tell us what topics you're most interested in hearing about. This podcast is for you. And thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next week.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Jennifer.
On Record PR is produced by Jennifer Simpson Carr and Matt Henderson, with support from the team at Furia Ruble Communications. This episode is edited by Isabel Horan and Christian Yamula. Visit www.onrecordpr.com for resources and more information.